We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Glory UGA podcast, brought to you by our great friends at Alumni Hall. I am Tyler, and guys, I am fired up about today's video because despite the fact that, yes, we're sitting here in the middle of the college football offseason, it's the early stage of the summer here on May 9th, despite all that, on today's video, I get to talk some actual, hardcore, legit college football, and I am absolutely fired up about it because earlier this week, DraftKings released some early lines for some of Georgia's biggest games of the 2024 season, and I am here to break it all down. We'll make it through each of these games eventually throughout the next week or two. I think there's 7 right now. We have 7 games where we actually have some lines according to DraftKings. We'll get to all of them, but today I'm going to narrow the focus. I'm going to focus exclusively on the Week 1 matchup between Georgia and Clemson inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We'll get into that, guys. I'm going to dive deep into it, but first, go ahead real quick, guys. Let's subscribe. I know, guys, that you are going to have some thoughts, probably some very passionate thoughts about what I'm about to say about this match between Georgia and Clemson Week 1. So go ahead and let me know, guys, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. Let me know. Leave those thoughts in the comments. So like, subscribe, comment. I certainly appreciate that, guys. But let's go ahead. Let's get into this match between Georgia and Clemson inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium to open the college football regular season. And Georgia opens as a 13.5-point favorite over Clemson. And I know if you're a Clemson fan right now, you are screaming at the top of your lungs, disrespect, disrespect, disrespect. And to be quite honest with you, if I was a Clemson fan, I'd be feeling the same way. I'd be saying the same things because this is a very proud program, guys, and for good reason. Let's not forget, despite what's happened within the past couple years, it really was not all that long ago that Clemson made 6 consecutive college football playoff appearances from 2015 to 2020, 6 consecutive CFP appearances and 2 national titles in that span. Right there with Alabama, they were one of the two best programs in the country for a pretty good period of time there. Unfortunately for Clemson fans, that is emphatically not where this Clemson program is right now. It just seems so long ago, guys. It really wasn't. Again, it's 4 years ago. But it just seems so long ago. It's just not where this Clemson program is right now. And there's a variety of reasons why. I think one of the bigger reasons is recruiting. You got to look at recruiting. Now, hear me out. I know if you're a Clemson fan, you're watching this, you're going to take offense to this. And I don't mean it this way. I'm not trying to take a shot at Clemson. I think it's a very good program. I have a lot of respect for Clemson. But at the same time, Clemson is not an elite recruiting power. That doesn't mean they don't recruit well. They do recruit really well relative to the broader world of college football, but they're also not a recruiting superpower. They're not one of those top-tier recruiting teams. They're a top 10-ish recruiting team. The last 2 cycles in the 247 composite, they finished number 11. Good. That's not elite, though, guys. The year before that, number 10. Good. Not elite. Yeah, it was 2020, I guess 2020, that number 5 class. That was 4 years ago, guys, and that has been the exception over the past 4 years. So you got a 4-year span of time where they had 1 class inside the top 5 and 1 at number 10 and 2 at number 11. That's really, really good relative to the rest of the country. Most teams around the country would kill for a recruiting profile like that. But at the same time, we have to be honest. That's not the same level of Georgia, of Alabama, of Ohio State, of Texas now. Those programs that are recruiting routinely inside the top 5 and oftentimes, certainly in Georgia's case, inside the top 3. Clemson just doesn't recruit like that. They're not a top-tier recruiting program. They are, I would put them in the tier right behind the top-tier recruiting programs, but they're not an elite recruiting power. And that's fine if you can compensate for that with elite quarterback play, which is what Clemson did from 2015 to 2020. They've never been like a truly elite recruiting power over a span of time. There have been a couple classes, top 5, maybe a couple right around top 3 in that span, but they didn't do it consistently. They've been more consistently around that top 10 level. And that's still a good enough roster to win national championship if you have a difference maker quarterback. And we know they had that with Deshaun Watson and with Trevor Lawrence in about 6-year span there with those guys. And that's what allowed them to make all those college football appearances and compensate for some of the spots in the roster where maybe they didn't have as much talent as the teams that they were contending against for national championships, the Alabamas of the world, the Ohio States of the world. That's really what allowed them to do that. And if you look at Clemson, again, had a really good roster for many, many years and still have a good roster relative to the rest of the world, or rest of the college football world. But when you have elite quarterback play, you can compensate for that. And then on top of that, you play in the ACC. I know Clemson fans are going to take offense to this too. That's fine. Go ahead and be offended. But let's just be real, guys. Be honest with yourselves. The ACC is just simply year in, year out, it's not as tough of a conference. So they had an easier path to get to the college football playoff. That's just reality. That's reality. And then when you get to the college football playoff and you do have an elite quarterback and a talented roster in a one-off situation in a semifinal game, you can beat anybody. Like, you have the ability to beat anybody in a one-game setting. You can also lose to anybody, which they did. They beat Alabama. They lost to Alabama. They won some games, lost some games in the college football playoff. But that was kind of their formula. But the entire time they were making the college football playoff, that 6-year run, they were always playing with fire, because you cannot always count on hitting on elite quarterback after elite quarterback after elite quarterback. You just can't count on that. And that was part of their formula. When you remove the elite quarterback from that formula, all of a sudden you have a Clemson program that's still really good. It's still a 9-10 win team, maybe sometimes on an 8-win team, but a 9-10 win program, maybe 11-win program, but you're not contending for national championships because you don't have that kind of quarterback. And that has been the issue for Clemson since that 6-year run, since 2020, right? They simply missed on quarterbacks. They missed on DJU. Clemson thought he was that next guy. He was the next guy in line to continue that quarterback lineage. But we know now he wasn't. He just simply wasn't that guy. They thought he was. Remember that game against Notre Dame in 2020? Thought he was that guy, but he wasn't. And so he goes off to Oregon State. Now he's at Florida State. Well, it's all good because Cade Klubnik, he's the next man up. He's the next guy. He's going to restore us back to our glory years. Well, so far, not so much. He hasn't been that guy. Now, could he make a huge leap this year? Yeah, anything's possible, but Clemson fans, again, I'm not trying to take a shot at you. Let's be real with ourselves. What have you seen from Cade Klubnik to this point in his career to make you think he's that kind of guy? What have you seen? What have you seen to make you think that he's Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence good? I haven't seen anything, man. I know you watch your team more than I do. I watch a lot of Clemson, but I don't watch them as much as you do. Fair, I admit that. But what have you seen? Like, if you're being honest, you haven't seen anything, guys, because he's not that guy. He's not Trevor Lawrence. He's not Deshaun Watson. And that's okay. Not everybody is. Those guys are rare. That's why you can't count on hitting on those kind of guys year after year after year, cycle after cycle. You're just not going to. Cade Klubnik's a good player. He's just not one of those guys, and that's unfortunate for him. I mean, that's unfortunate for Clemson, because for Clemson to win a national championship with the roster that they have, the fact that they have a really talented roster, but not an elite roster, not a top 5 level roster, they have to have an elite quarterback to be able to compensate for that in order to win national championships. And with Cade Klubnik, with DJU, they simply don't have that. So they're not a real contender for a national championship. And I know that's tough for Clemson fans to accept. I know, especially when you were that program for a 6-year span. I know that's tough to accept that, man, we're not there because we don't have the quarterback. But that's a big part of the equation. You don't have it, and you are not a national championship contender because you don't have the roster for it, right? If you take the quarterback out of the equation, if you go back those years you're making the national championship games, if you take Trevor Lawrence off those teams, if you take Deshaun Watson on those teams, are you beating Alabama? And you insert DJU or Cade Klubnik into those rosters, are you winning national championships? No, you're not. You're just simply not. The quarterback compensated for, I don't want to say lack of talent. There's still a lot of talent on the rosters. You had elite players at certain spots in the roster, just not enough of them. There were too many holes on the roster where you just simply could not match up from a talent standpoint. But when you have elite quarterback play, you can compensate for it. Without it, you just can't. And Clemson's not a true national title contender with the way that they recruit without that elite quarterback play. Now, the great equalizer in today's world of college football would be the transfer portal, right? If you miss on a guy in a given class, it's all good. You go out in the transfer portal and you plug those holes. That would be the great equalizer. It is for a lot of programs. But Dabo Swinney knows better, guys. He knows better. Dabo Swinney is not going to use the transfer portal. And this year's case in point, 12 guys left the program via the transfer portal. 0 guys came into the program via the transfer portal. You are putting yourself at a disadvantage when you do that, guys. For Clemson, the transfer portal might as well not exist. They simply don't use it. From day one, essentially, they simply do not use it. And that creates a problem. We'll get to why in a second here. But look, I understand where Dabo's coming from to a degree. I understand it's about culture. You go into these families' living rooms, you tell them to their face, like, hey, we're going to take care of your boy, we're going to take care of your kid, we're going to develop him, and if he works hard, he's going to have a chance to play. And you don't want to mess with that culture by bringing in somebody from outside the program and having them jump a guy that's worked his butt off and you told back in the day that, hey man, if you just work hard and keep grinding, your time will come. Well, when his time comes and then you bypass him with a more talented player you brought from the transfer portal, well, that can kind of start messing with your culture. I get where Dabo Swinney's coming from. I understand that way of thinking. It's an honorable way of thinking, but it's also a very archaic way of thinking. It really is. So to me, if that is your process, if that's the way that you are approaching building your roster, quite simply, you are not serious about winning national championships. Because what you're essentially saying is, I don't care about going out and getting players to make my program better, my team better. I'm not concerned about going out and getting more talented players that can fill the holes that we have, because I have loyalty to the guys that I brought in. And I respect the hell out of that, the loyalty. I do. But again, you're not, in this day and age, when every other team around you is taking advantage of the portal to fill the holes in their roster, that their misses when it comes to high school recruiting, and you're not doing that, you are putting yourself at a disadvantage. You are essentially tying both hands behind your back. No one's doing it to you. You're doing it to yourself. And that's what's happening with Clemson. Because the reality is, no one bats 1,000 in recruiting. Even Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, when he was coaching, no one bats 1,000. Every program has misses. But when you don't use the transfer portal and you miss on a guy at a high school, you kind of just have to roll with it. You don't really have an answer for it. So what you're going to have is a deficiency at a position or multiple positions on your roster, and that's what Clemson has. Their offensive line has been a case in point for a while. Offensive line's been fine, but remember, I know this was a couple years, it was years ago in 2021, but it really hasn't gotten that much better since then. Remember that first game? I know it was a brutal offensive game, but remember how Georgia was just destroying Clemson's offensive line in 2021, just eating them alive? Well, that's kind of continued, guys. They missed when it comes to recruiting on a couple of those guys. They just simply didn't have the roster. Now, Clemson, a program as proud as Clemson, could go out and get guys from the portal to fill some of those holes, but they won't do it. They don't do it. So they don't have the roster. They still don't have the roster to contend for national championships, absent a difference maker at quarterback. And again, they do not have that when you're talking about Cade Klubnik, right? So I still think this is a very good Clemson team. I have respect for Clemson. I think they're a good team. But at the same time, both things can be true. You can be a good team, but also not be good enough to truly contend for a national championship. And that's where I believe this program still is entering the 2024 season. Now, saying that, I will defend Clemson a little bit here. I think Clemson was better than what the average fan thinks they were last year. Look, they're 8-4 in the regular season. I think 9-4 overall. They beat Kentucky in the bowl game. Was it the Camping World Bowl? I want to say one of those bowl games. They ended up 9-4. And you look at that record and you say, well, I mean, Clemson's fallen off, man. Yeah, record-wise, yes, they're falling off from where they were contending for national championships. But when you watch the team, Clemson was better than 8-4 last year, guys. And their statistical profile would tell you that. I'm a big believer in yardage margin. That's one of the primary statistical measures that I use to really evaluate teams. And if you're not familiar with yardage margin, it's a very simple stat. I just think it's a great stat. You take the total yards your team has gained, and you subtract from that the total yards your team has surrendered. So that tells you either how much did you outgain your opponents by, or how much did your opponents outgain you by. So either how much did you dominate your opponents, versus maybe how much did your opponents dominate you. Well, Clemson, they were elite in yards margin last year, but they were top 10. They were right there at number 10. I put together the numbers. They were essentially plus 1,500 total yards last year, which means in totality, they outgained their opponents by 1,500 yards last year. That is a good number, guys. Not an elite number. That's not a profile of a team that's going to win a national championship, but that's a profile of a team that's going to go typically 10-2, maybe 9-3. Clemson went 8-4 last year, but it wasn't because they weren't good. It really was because they shot themselves in the foot far too often, and they lost a bunch of games that they shouldn't have lost. Like Clemson, I mean, you could make an argument they could have gone 11-1 last year in the regular season, guys. If they would have won some of the games that they should have won. And it was turnovers, it was red zone inefficiency that absolutely sunk them and caused them to go 8-4. But they weren't that bad. And you saw Dabo Swinney, how frustrated he was in his press conferences last year because he felt it. He knew it. Like, they were better than what their record said. He knew it, but everyone wants to fixate on your record because at the end of the day, you are what your record says you are, I guess. But Clemson was better than that. Now, again, they weren't national championship good. Georgia, for instance, to give you a comparison, Georgia was plus 2,900 yards in their yards margin last year, which means, again, Georgia outgained its opponents by 2,900 yards. So about twice as good as Clemson was in this yards margin. So Clemson was good. This is my point, right? They're good. they're not national championship good. And I don't expect that to change this year. But they still were better than what the 8-4 record said last year. I'll give you a quick little rundown of some of their games last year. So Duke, remember week 1, they lost to Duke on that Monday night, that Labor Day night. Everyone's like, oh my God, Clemson, they just fallen off. They lost to Duke. Well, with Riley Leonard within healthy, Duke was actually pretty good last year. He got injured late in the season. They kind of fell off a little bit. But they still outgained Duke. Remember that? If you watched that game closely and didn't just go box score watching, they outgained Duke 424 to 374. Not by a crazy margin, but they outgained Duke. And they had multiple scoring opportunities inside the red zone, and they just had catastrophic turnovers. They simply could not convert red zone opportunities into touchdowns. And they were turning the ball over, just doing really dumb things, again, shooting themselves in the foot. They had no business losing that game, but they blew it. Let's just be real. They blew that game, should have won it, but they did. So that's one game they should have won. That's 9-3. They win that game. Florida State, guys, I still am baffled at how Clemson lost that game. Florida State had zero business winning that game. If you watch that game, like I did from start to finish, you know what I'm talking about. And Clemson fans, you know what I'm talking about. Clemson dominated Florida State. They outgained them 429 to 311. It was just, man, red zone inefficiencies and just bad turnovers. I mean, some of you probably remember, forget who it was for Florida State, but Cade Klubnik got blindsided. Nobody blocked. There was a linebacker coming off the side. Nobody off the edge. Nobody picked him up. Cade Klubnik is blindsided, gets destroyed. Florida State picks the ball up, and I believe they ran it back for a touchdown, right? I believe that, or they didn't pick it up, run it back for a touchdown. They had a big gain off of it and set up a score for Florida State that really kind of turned that game around. And then late in the game, Clemson, despite that, was still going to win the game. They were driving to put the game on ice, but they got inside the red zone, and instead of trying to actually punch the ball in the end zone, they just set up for a chip shot field goal, and that would have won the game. They were trying to, last play of the game, kick the field goal, and Florida State has no time. Normally, that's a good strategy, right? But when you have a kicker that's not just a walk-on, the guy you just pulled off the street like the week of the game, that's a risky strategy. Now, you would think, okay, he can still make a chip shot field goal. Well, yeah, you thought wrong. He didn't. He missed that, and you lose in overtime, and it's like, man, Clemson blew that game. They had the game once. That's another game. It's 2 games right there they should have won. NC State, they lost that game. Guys, they dominated that game. They outgained NC State 364 to 202. Again, turnovers, red zone inefficiency, costing that game. Miami actually outgained them, but it was a very tight margin. They were outgained 362 to 345 in that game, but had 3 turnovers and 3 catastrophic turnovers against Miami. They still should have won that game. In fact, like, you could make an argument Clemson maybe should have gone undefeated last year in the regular season. They still wouldn't have been a national championship good because the ACC just sucked, but they could easily have gone undefeated. If a couple of things had gone their way, if they had not shot themselves in the foot, they would have gotten out of their own way. So, again, I think Clemson was better than 8-4 would suggest, okay? But at the same time, again, that doesn't mean that they were in the conversation for a national championship. Now, if you look ahead to this year, okay, so last year is last year. We've already gone over that. What does Clemson look like this year? Well, offensively, they've got a ton of returning production. They're top 20 nationally in Bill Connolly's returning production metric. They return 79% of their offensive production. That's a really good starting point, right? And they did deal with some injuries, especially at the skill positions last year. They were banged up, man. It was tough for them. But despite the fact that, yeah, you return a lot of talent, or at least a lot of production offensively, I still go back to it. Your quarterback is still Cade Klubnik. And I can't get past that, guys. Your quarterback is still Cade Klubnik. That is your guy. And he simply was not good last year. He wasn't. And I know it's his first year as a starter, so if you want to give him a pass, okay. But even as the season progressed, you would think, okay, yeah, we're in game 10, 11, 12. He should be a lot better. He wasn't. I mean, again, Clemson fans, you know this. You watch the same team I watch. Late in the season, they were trying to protect Klubnik. Like, they just weren't even trying to throw the football because they didn't believe in the guy. He lost confidence. They lost confidence in him. Now, maybe an offseason changes all that. Yes, it's going to be a year 2 with Garrett Riley. You have another year under your belt, and you're going to be more familiar with the offense. That's true. That's true. But again, I go back to what I asked you earlier. What have you seen from Cade Klubnik to make you think that he's actually an elite quarterback? If you're saying there's something in there, you're lying to yourself. You're just basing it off recruiting rankings and hope because you haven't seen anything tangible on the field to suggest to you he's that kind of guy. And the numbers back up. It's not even just the numbers, guys. The decision-making this guy is, like I mentioned, catastrophic turnovers. Well, a big part of that is catastrophic decision-making by Cade Klubnik. Like, there are many, many times out there, almost on a week-by-week basis, where you're like, what are you doing, dude? Like, what are you possibly thinking out there? And just put his team consistently in really, really tough spots. And the numbers, guys, are just not good. 63% completion percentage, 2,800 yards. Now, here's the kicker. 6.3 yards per attempt. That's abysmal. 6.3 yards per attempt. And I look at the completion percentage number and the yards per attempt. If your completion percentage number is at 63%, which in this day and age of college football is not good. It's not good. It's fine. It's not really good, though. But if your completion percentage is down at like 63%, then your yards per attempt number should be a lot higher because that would seem to say, okay, well, yeah, you're pushing the ball vertically down the field more. You're taking more low percentage shots down the field. But when you hit them, you hit explosive plays. So, yeah, I get maybe lower percentage, but higher yards per attempt. But when you have a lower percentage and a very low and abysmally low yards per attempt, because 6.3 yards per attempt essentially says you're throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage the vast majority of the time. You're playing an RPO game. You're not pushing the ball down the field. And if you watch Clemson, they really were not. And that's very concerning if I'm a Clemson fan. 6.3 yards per attempt, you're getting a lot of high percentage throws and you're not completing them at a high rate. That's highly concerning. And you only throw for 2,800 yards, 19 touchdowns, 9 picks. Yes, he's a good athlete, but the guy had 4 games last year where he was sub 60% completion percentage. That's my point, guys. Clemson doesn't have a guy at quarterback. They have a pretty good quarterback. They don't have an elite quarterback. I mean, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, would they ever in a season have 4 games under 50% completion percentage? Never. And with a roster that's good but not elite, you're not going to win national championships with quarterback play like that. You're just simply not. You're not. He's good. He's just not. He's not what they need. He's not that elite guy. Now, I will give them this. Clemson, I think, has some really solid weapons at receiver. They're not elite, but they're solid players if they're healthy. So I think Tyler Brown, I like him the best of the bunch of the receivers. I think he's a really talented player. Antonio Williams dealt with some injuries, but he's a good little slot player for them. Tony Stellato's solid. I mean, I don't want to say he's just a guy, but maybe slightly more than just a guy. He's not much more than that. Now, one guy I love with this Clemson pass catching group, he's not a receiver, he's a tight end. Jake Briningstool, I think, is elite. I think Jake Briningstool has a chance to be one of the best tight ends in the country this year. I think he's absolutely an NFL tight end. I think he would warrant first-round consideration with the talent he has, but with the positional value they place on tight ends, probably not, but I think he'll be a first or second round guy. I believe that. I think he's a really, really talented guy, really good athlete, really strong hands, pass catching abilities. I like him a lot. I think he's their most talented weapon offensively. So they have some solid weapons out there. Then at running back, I mean, you lose Will Shipley, but you get Phil Maffa back. And I like Phil Maffa. Phil Maffa's a tough physical runner, has really good vision. He's not a home run threat. He doesn't have elite speed, but he's really good in the hole, has that vision, can make people miss in the hole. I think he's a good back, but then I have questions like, okay, he was a really good 1-2 punch with Will Shipley, but who's the other punch this year? Is it just Phil Maffa? Like, somebody has to step up. And I don't know if Phil Maffa is ready to be 100% the guy all the time. Good player, really good player. I want to see who they've got to go along with Phil Maffa there. Now, defensively, they were elite last year. They were great. They were awesome defensively last year. But this year, the problem is they returned less than half that production. They only returned 49% of their defensive production from last year. And they lose some key players. A guy like Nate Wiggins, for example, right? Really highly rated cornerback, taken in the first round of the NFL draft. Now, they do have some big-time players coming back in key spots, some veterans, some really, really good players. And I would say borderline elite players at spots. I think Barrett Carter is really, really good. I don't know if I would call Barrett Carter elite. If he was, Barrett Carter would have gone pro this year. He came back for a reason. It's a lot of the same things I said about Cedric Van Pran. Cedric Van Pran was a great college center for us, but there's a reason he came back for his senior year. He wasn't in the NFL draft grade that he was going for. Same thing with Barrett Carter. Carter is good. He's a really talented, good athlete. He's kind of a tweener. He plays inside linebacker, but he's not the biggest guy, and he struggles with blocks in his face. He struggles to disengage from that. And then, so if you want to play him out wide, at times they kind of play him like a nickelback role at times. And he's a really good athlete, but he's not the kind of athlete who's going to be able to really hold up in space against the best slot receivers, the shiftiest, fastest guys that teams have in that slot position. So he's kind of a tweener. Like, where does he fit in the NFL? But he's still a really good college player, really good athlete, played a lot of football for them out of North Gwinnett High School. I really liked him coming out of high school. He's a really good player. Wade Woodaz, the guy I think is a really, really good player for them as well. So he's coming back. Peter Woods, I think, might be one of the next defensive linemen for them. I thought he showed some really strong signs as a freshman last year. So they have some really talented players at spots defensively. But they also have some holes. When you only have 49% of your defensive roster returning, you're in a position where you need guys to either take big steps in year 2 or year 3, or you're counting on true freshmen like Sammy Brown, who are highly touted true freshmen, but you're counting on them to come in right away and be impact players immediately. And I tell you guys all the time, teams that are in a situation where you have to count on true freshmen to be impact players for you in order for you to have the kind of season that you want to have, you are not a serious national championship contender, because you can't count on true freshmen. What you get from them is a luxury. It's gravy. You can't count on that. True national title contenders are not in this position of having to count on true freshmen to be impact players. You might get something from them, but you don't have to get it from them. Clemson on defense might be in a spot where they got to get something from these true freshmen. If not from the true freshmen, guys that haven't been those players have to take big leaps in year 2 or year 3, and that's asking a lot because you're not taking guys from the portal. Clemson could have solved some of these issues defensively, some of the losing all this talent, if they went to the portal and got elite guys, big-time players to replace them, but they're not going to do that. Dabo knows better. So now they're in the position of hoping that these other guys that have been on the roster for a while develop into elite players, even though they haven't really necessarily shown signs of doing that yet, or these true freshmen come in and are studs right away. And maybe that will happen, but are you ready to bet on that? Do you really want to put money on that in this week 1 match against Georgia, against a team as talented as Georgia is? I don't know if I want to be in that business. I don't know. But still, I think Clemson's a really well-coached defense. They do have a lot of good talent. I fully expect to be a very good defense this year. I think their offense, with what they have coming back, and even though I don't believe in Cade Klubnik as an elite quarterback, he should take some strides in year 2 as a starter. I think their offense will be a little bit better this year, but I think their defense will take a little bit of a step back, right? I think that's probably what we're going to see from Clemson. But I think all in all, they have a very legitimate shot to win the ACC this year. I don't think Florida State is going to be as good. I don't believe in DJU. I simply do not. I think, and if they had to go to Florida State, that'd be a tough game, but Clemson's won there before. They can win there again. And outside of Florida State, Louisville, are they going to be as good this year? I know people are high on Virginia Tech, Kyron Jones, really, really good player. And they do have to go to Virginia Tech late in the season. Could be a tough matchup. But I still think Clemson has a better overall roster than Virginia Tech. Same thing as NC State. I know they lost to NC State last year. They get them at home this year, and they should be NC State. So I think Clemson is a legitimate ACC title contender. And if you win the ACC, you get in the college football playoff, right? But again, I still don't buy them as a legit national championship contender. So putting all that together as essentially a 2-touchdown dog to Georgia, I think that's pretty fair. I do. I think that's pretty fair because Georgia, as I said earlier, guys, that this is just simply a better roster than Clemson. We have our quarterback. Yeah, he's going to his second year as a starter, but he's far more advanced than what Clemson has with Cade Klubnik. Carson Beck's just simply a superior quarterback. Georgia's much better on the offensive line. I would say pretty comparable on the defensive line. Georgia, I might give Georgia a slight edge because I like Peter Woods, but outside of that, I need to see some of these younger guys for Clemson. But it's close on the defensive line. I think Georgia's much I don't know if I want to go as much, but Georgia's better at inside linebacker. Georgia's better in the secondary. Georgia's better defensively. Georgia's better offensively. Georgia has better weapons offensively. I believe Georgia has a better coaching staff. And, I mean, it's a neutral site, but it's in Atlanta. There'll be a lot of Clemson fans there. It's a big, passionate fan base. They'll show up. But Georgia should win this game. I do think that Georgia's roster is 2 touchdowns or more better than Clemson's roster. So I think this is a fair spread. I know Clemson fans would disagree, and you certainly have the right to. Again, it's a proud program, and I respect that, and I respect Clemson as a program. But I just think Georgia's roster is in a different spot than Clemson. And I know you say, well, hey, in 2021, well, that great Georgia team, you only beat Clemson by 7. True, but that was also a JT Daniels, a quarterback, and that was before we kind of hit our stride in 2021. If we play Clemson late in the season, like week 11 in 2021, we beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns. I mean, I truly believe that. Now, Clemson fans would argue that, no, you wouldn't. I know that's not how things work, but I think Georgia was much better than that 2021 Clemson team. We just didn't show it necessarily week 1. But this year, I think Georgia's 2 touchdowns are more better. But here's the thing with this game. I think Clemson's game plan is going to be one where they're going to lean on their defense. They believe in their defense, and offensively, I'm sure they have expectations to be better in year 2 of Garrett Riley, and they probably will be. But I imagine with what Georgia has in terms of offensive firepower, they want to try to limit Georgia's possessions and make this a defensive struggle. Because I don't believe Clemson truly, deep down, I don't think their coaching staff believes they can keep up with Georgia in a track meet offensively. I don't think they believe that. So what do? What's your path to victory? You have to make this a mud fight, right? Like you have to limit our possessions and keep the score relatively low so you can hang around and have a chance to win the game. So Clemson's going to, with Phil Maffa, who I think they're probably going to lean on heavily this year, they're going to try to go with a ground control run game. They are going to try to grind the clock, limit possessions, play really good defense, and give themselves a chance to be in it late in the game. So with that defense, and I think the way they're going to approach the game, I think it will be a lower scoring game than maybe Georgia will be playing the rest of the year. And in week 1, like we saw in 2021, like you're still trying to get the feel for your team. You don't fully know. You think you know, but you don't fully know. Although Georgia did destroy, or was it 49-3 to open the season in 2022. So we also have done that. But I think 14's fair. I think Georgia, again, is 2 to 3 touchdowns better than Clemson. But in the context, I think how Clemson is going to play this game and approach the game, I think 2 touchdowns is about right. So I would take Georgia, and I am going to take Georgia at 13.5. I like that number a lot. I would take Georgia anywhere between probably like 13.5 to 17.5. If we get into like the 20 range, I don't know, because again, with the way that I think Clemson's going to approach this game from a game plan standpoint, I don't know if Georgia will be able to extend that lead that much, barring any kind of like crazy turnover stuff with Clemson. And Clemson did turn the ball over 22 times last year, guys. That was the major issue for them. So if that happens, all bets are off. And it starts to get out of hand. It starts to steamroll. Well, Clemson, they're going to have to go away from the run game. They're going to have to start throwing the football. So if Georgia gets out to an early lead and Clemson gets into a hole and they have to play catch up coming from behind and they get away from the run game, well, Clemson's not built to do that, and it could get ugly for them. But if they can run the football a little bit and limit Georgia's possessions and play really strong defense, then the game could be a little bit closer than expected. I do expect Georgia to win by two plus touchdowns, but again, I don't think it'll be like a 28, like a 49-3 game like we saw against Oregon. I would love that, but I respect Clemson. I think how they're going to approach it we'll keep that from happening this year. But all right, guys, that is my breakdown of the Georgia-Clemson game. Obviously, we'll have a lot more coverage of the Georgia-Clemson matchup as we get deeper and deeper into the offseason, closer to the first game. And we'll do our Scout the Enemy episode. Those of you who've been around for a long time, our loyal listeners, you know how we do with our Scout the Enemy episodes. We go as deep as anyone will with all these teams that Georgia will be facing. But this is an early little primer for you guys based on this opening spread from DraftKings. So appreciate it, guys. I will be back over the next week or two doing a video for each one of these games where the lines have been released, but I wanted to open day with Clemson. So thank you for being here. Again, like, subscribe, leave your thoughts below. I know if you're a Clemson fan, you're going to kill me. I get that. I understand. That's cool. Let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.